Good evening. This is the second of our lectures on English in Action, and I'm so happy to see you this evening. We're going to be talking about why listening is so important in business and life and how to make it better. My name is Elizabeth Elmer. I'm an experienced English language coach. Let me help you reach your English language goals in life and work, increasing your fluency and confidence. Today, when we're talking about the skill of listening, which remember is a very important thinking skill, we're going to be looking at these W words. So we're going to be talking about what is listening, when do we need listening in business, why is listening so important in a business setting, and you could extend from there as to why it's important in your personal life. Here's another what. This second what is, what are the sub-skills? Listening is our big skill, and we have sub-skills, and those are the things that we need to use as teaching points or as learning points. And the last one is how. How can we use and improve listening? Basically, what kind of practices can you do or have? So the first one is what? What is listening? Well, listening is involved with sounds, and at the most basic level when we're dealing with children, we're talking about sound-symbol correspondence. How we relate sounds and symbols being letters and words. So listening is receiving sounds, but also remember it's a thinking skill. So we need to be thinking and comprehending. So much with children and adults, ourselves, is a thinking process. What do we need to learn? Well, we need to learn what are called sub-skills. And each of our major skills, remember our first lecture, we had 8 skills. Each one of them have sub-skills. And the same is true in listening. So here's our first question. When are we going to need to listen in a business situation? Well, the first would be meetings. The second, presentations. The third, a one-to-one, face-to-face, or maybe not face-to-face, it might be just you and another person in a Zoom, and special situations. So first of all, in meetings are difficult because there's usually noise, there's usually various people, there's usually people talking on top of each other, so there's a lot of problems that can confuse or distract us in listening. In a presentation, which is the second time that we're involved in listening in a business situation, is like what we're doing today, the presentation. So you as the listener are at the mercy of the speaker. The best thing that I suggest in a presentation is preparation. What can you do before a presentation? Well, you could learn about the speaker. You could maybe anticipate what the vocabulary could be. You could start thinking, well, what are they going to be talking about? And the third situation on a one-to-one. What's happening in a one-to-one situation? Well, it's much easier because, for example, you can ask me to stop, or I don't understand, or you could send me a message, okay, that please help me. There are some cultural aspects as well. How do you interrupt? How do you ask for a clarification? And the last one, number 4, are special situations. What can be some special situations? Well, one could be police. There's many situations, for example, in the United States, where the police go to the wrong house and create a big problem. Probably they weren't listening to the correct address. For example, a doctor and a nurse. The doctor says, hand me scalpel number 1, and the nurse doesn't hear properly. That could be really quite problematic. And the third problematic situation would be a pilot. The pilot and the traffic control. What would happen if the pilot doesn't understand the traffic controller and lands on the wrong runway? This would be a big problem. Also, some special situations that are not such life and death situations. For example, being at the advanced level, you might want to go then to an examination. For example, a TOEFL examination, a TOEIC examination, a Cambridge examination. Not life and death, but you need to prepare for the next situation. Why? Why is listening so important in a business situation? Well, one of my students was just telling me about how the boss from the United States, because it's an American company, was talking to the people in Mexico, and he was giving his presentation, and then he said, "What do you think? What do you think about my idea?" Well, one of the persons could answer, but one of the persons said, basically, that just thank you. So he didn't understand. So it's very important. So in the first situation, we're talking about building relationships. If you don't understand, then you get frustrated. You could feel left out. Probably like the example I just told you, that particular employee felt left out. The second would be learning new skills. You often need to listen to learn a new skill. And the third is to perform effectively. So again, one of my students was telling me how she was in a session with the boss who happened to be American. And he said, use the format and a certain format. But she thought she understood, but she actually didn't understand. So she spent a lot of time and energy creating the format, which was in Excel, for the second time. And then when she turned it in, the boss said, "Oh, you didn't have to make it." So part was company culture, and part was that she didn't really understand. So listening is really important in a business situation, which gets us to the next question is, why is there misunderstanding? Or why can there be misunderstanding? Well, the first could be a lack of vocabulary. There might be a lot of words that you might not understand. It's very important to keep increasing your vocabulary. The second is a lack of grammar. For example, if somebody uses the passive voice, that was created, etc., or that has already been created. Well, there's a couple of words in there in the passive voice already, for example, in the passive voice. And if you're not familiar with the passive voice, then it could create a misunderstanding. The third one is the lack of phonology knowledge. For example, not knowing or realizing or identifying the accent, for example, from India, or a second language learner from Singapore, for example, or even from the United States. There's lots of different dialects. The third one, and I've got the pictures on the top, but it's the lack of knowledge about speaking and writing. So it's not really understanding how it's organized, how language is organized in English. Remember, in English, it's a very straight, narrow, which is different from Spanish. The third is passive listening. Passive listening is not thinking as you're going along. For example, the opposite of passive is active listening. To be involved in active listening, you're thinking, you're paraphrasing, you're asking questions as you go along. Another source of misunderstanding could be distractions or lack of focus. One of my students was saying that when she was listening to the native speaker of English, she didn't understand, so she was just frustrated. And so she just started looking at her cell phone and answering her cell phone messages. And she started doing other things. And then she didn't understand even more. And the last one that's listed here down at the bottom is a lack of sub-skills knowledge. And we're going to be talking about what those sub-skills are. What? Here's another what. We talked about the what of what is listening. Here's the second what. What do we need to learn? Or in the case of teaching, what do we need to teach in listening? So if you're teaching English, what would be the teaching points? Or if you're learning, what could be the learning points? Well, you need to listen for sub-skills. And we've got a whole list of sub-skills that we're going to be sharing with you. And we need to learn different areas of learning. Over on my right, we're talking about listening and the other skills. So we're talking about listening and pronunciation. So over there, we're talking about the sub-skills of connected speech. So when somebody says coulda, woulda, shoulda, gonna, wanna, that's connected speech. Or when the consonant and the vowel goes together and you have is it, that's a sub-skill. When people are from other countries, they might be native speakers, but they're from a country and you're not familiar with it. One of the other sub-skills could be, like I mentioned, Singapore. The person would be speaking English as a second language, but it's always good to listen because you might need to be dealing with business, and English is the lingua franca. The second area is the critical thinking. The critical thinking are points such as prediction. What do you think it's going to be about? So in the Fluency Club, we had the video about almost there. You know, before the video or the pre-listening skills are, what do you think it's going to be about? So it could be prediction. It could be another aspect, such as thinking skills, like perhaps we need to stop and go on with what a thinking skill would be, such as, for example, a thinking skill could be prediction as one, main idea as another, details as another. So you listen to something and, you know, what is the main idea? Are you completely lost, or can you figure out what the main idea is? Culture and cultural aspects or cultural differences. So also in the Fluency Club, we had the main character, which was Tiana, who was a Black American, and she was in New Orleans, and she came from a different cultural background, even though she was American. So you could be listening, but there would be these things that would be hard to understand. Vocabulary. So if you don't understand all the vocabulary, it's hard. But many of the skills are just trying to understand from context. Maybe I don't understand all the words, but I can guess. So vocabulary, I can guess a lot of things if I'm thinking. And hopefully we're involved in critical thinking skills or active thinking skills. Reading, writing, psychology. Well, listening relates to reading. Listening relates to writing. Listening relates to psychology. Okay, active learning or active listening involves listening to the person, eye contact with the person, encouraging the person as the listener. So it's important on both sides to be active listening. And this comes from psychology. This comes from a certain branch of psychology with Carl Rogers way back in the 1950s. And the next area being speaking. Here's a sample listening practice. So when you're teaching or when you're learning at home, this is a simple exercise. So you want to practice listening. What can you do? Well, the first thing you could do in prediction is to look at the pictures. What do the pictures tell you? What do you think is happening in these pictures? What kind of idea? What do you think is going to happen? This is before you listen. The third is to anticipate vocabulary. What vocabulary do you think you might be listening to? Yesterday, I was teaching a class and we had a listening on introductions. It was called Introduction Etiquette. So there were some pictures. The students tried to figure out what was happening. And some of them figured out, well, there was an introduction happening. What was the vocabulary? So they tried to figure out what were some words in vocabulary about introductions. So nice to meet you, relationship, steer the conversation, etc. So number 4, what do you expect to hear? And so we looked at the title. The title was Listening Etiquette. And so we came up with some ideas about this particular listening was going to be about some polite ways to introduce somebody. Number 5 over here is the word gist. You might not be familiar with the word gist. It means main idea. What is the main idea? So you listen to something and then you go, what are they talking about? What is the main idea? What is the gist? And then you play. You play the track again. So you ask them, listen for the main idea. And then afterwards, you ask another person, a student, or you ask yourself, what was the main idea? What were they talking about? Were they happy, sad, etc.? The next is details. What are the details? And typical English language books and typical business English books always ask detailed questions, like true and false, these kinds of questions. Then you could play again and check your answer. And then typically there's a speaking or writing activity that comes next. Here's an example from a wonderful book that I found, and it's a business English book. And here are 2 of the pages from this book to show you how this particular book uses a simple language production that we just talked about, or a simple lesson order. For example, if you look at the picture, here's a photograph of somebody and she's looking at her desk calendar. And then way down at the bottom, you see a watch, you see somebody shaking hand, you see another clock, you see a man running, you see somebody that's happy, and you see another man that's running, okay? So these pictures down here are people that are really stressed out. And this girl up here looks really stressed out also. We look at the title, and we see the title is Time Management. So we get an idea what this particular listening is going to be about. And then we try to think about, well, what could be some of the words? So we have make up for time, behind schedule, delay, deadline, prioritize, etc. Then what would happen is you would read the listening. In this case, it's also a reading. And then there are detailed questions. And before the detailed question, we would ask, well, what is the main idea? There are vocabulary exercises. There's more listening exercises. And up here at the top, there's a role play, which is a speaking activity and a writing activity. So this is typically what happens in a listening exercise. You don't need a book. You would just need exercise. Now, you could come up with lots of different books. There are lots of different books that can help you. You can find exercises in the British Council, in preparation for examination, like the TOEFL examination. You can look in many different places for listening exercise. There's a wonderful site that I found, and it's got a really strange name. It's called ESL Lounge Student. ESL Lounge Student. And in that particular site, they say an Australian man is talking to an American woman, and they're talking about the movie. So that's one that I would suggest as well. Some general considerations. What are some things to consider in listening? First of all is a positive mindset. Be positive that you can learn and that you can understand. Second, a little at a time, little by little. Today I started with a course 1 student. She actually had been studying English for 4 years, but she still was at level 1. So she told me after class, she said, I've never spoken English. All my classes, they never spoke English. And I told her, number 1, be positive, and 2, little by little. Number 3, be consistent. Try to practice every day. It's important to have extensive and intensive learning. So look at number 4, ABL. Always be listening. So, for example, when you're cooking, even when you're taking a shower, when you're putting on makeup, try to always be listening. So that's what's called extensive learning. Always being trying to learn, but also try to come up with intensive learning. You could also associate listening with other activities such as walking, exercising, etc. My sister-in-law puts on her earphones and listens to an audiobook. Think of different contexts and speakers and topics and variety. Have a variety to make it interesting. Comprehensible input. This is like in lesson number 1, lecture number 1, we talked about comprehensible input. We listened to Krashen. Try to make it something you can understand. Maybe you need to go to level 1 or beginners. You could go to Fluent U. They have beginning, intermediate, advanced. If you're a beginning student, you could talk at or listen to something at the easier level. If you're more advanced, go to something more complex. If you think you understand everything, go higher. Push yourself higher. Listen to what you like. If after a day at work you're really tired, you don't want to hear anything about business, you can listen to something else, and it would still be very valid. It takes time and practice. Give it time. Be patient. Some people say it takes 3 months to see results. Wow, like a musical instrument, like fitness, give yourself time, and it could take up to 3 months to see that you're getting better. The students that I have that have been with me 3 months, I can see they're getting better. Practice makes perfect. Number 9, emphasize the big picture. Emphasize the main ideas. Try to guess from context. Number 10, go beyond your comfort zone. Go more advanced. Go more complex. Always improve. And number 11, relax and enjoy. Enjoy the process. What's next? Well, we're going to have time for questions and answers, for discussion and comments. And the question would be, what's your plan? What's your plan? To contact me, here's the way to contact me. I'm an English language coach, and there's a telephone number, and there's an Instagram account. And before I finish, I just want to mention some games. For example, this is a wonderful game of 3-letter words. This is BED, and the game which you play either with yourself or with other people is called Spelling Bee. And there's these little bees, and you try to put in what the vowel could be. And in this case, it could be bad and bed and bid. Another thing I want to mention is you can use actually children's books, such as this one. This is actually for children to learn phonics, but you could also use it as an adult. And another one that we use a lot is a "This Is Me" poster. You can use visuals about yourself to talk back and forth. And just some very last ones, very quickly. You could play games. You could do phonics. You could repeat after me. For example, listening to this particular video, this particular recording, you could listen, go back, listen, go back. One of the things you could do is listen and repeat, and listen in shadow. You could try to say what I say. Watch videos, watch videos, and watch how the speaker uses their hands and their face. You can read and listen. You can write and listen. You could look at the timestamp and go back and say, oh, I didn't understand that. Look at the sub skills, look at the signal markers, and look at note taking. So that's all for tonight. If you have any questions, be sure and let me know. And I thank you very much for being with us for this lesson, this lecture on listening skills. So thank you very much for being with me. And that's all for tonight. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.